Things like going to Kunta Kinte Island and that type of thing.
Sorry, did you say Kunta Kinte Island?
Yeah.
Kunta Kinte, okay, from roots.
Yeah. There's a place called Kunta Kinte Island.
Pour myself some extreme views to just cancel out everyone and just make it FBA. Do you think that's what's going on here? Or do you think that it's true that it was only African Americans that created hip hop?
The very first sculptures the ancient Greeks are known to have made, they look very, very ancient Egyptian.
Mr. Walker, why is it those Olmec heads look African? They got strong Nigerian features, like, do you know what I mean? So,
welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to react to Robin Walker's second visit to the Drazzy Show. And if you haven't seen my reactions to his first visit, please check them out. All right, let's get into it.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Drazzy Show. And today I have an amazing guest who I've already called an amazing guest, but they've come back on the show again, so I had to call them amazing guest again. And it's the one and only Mr. Robin Walker. How are you, sir?
Very, very well indeed. Thanks for inviting me back.
Now, one of the things you told me is that you've just come back from Africa. Where did you go to?
I was in Gambia. I stayed at a place called the Royal Sankofa Estate. So I taught a African history course while I was there. And the idea was they eat twice per day, and then the third one would be going out to dinner.
I see.
There would then be a lecture, perhaps in the morning, given by me. And then there'd be a Black history excursion. Things like going to Kunta Kinte Island and that type of thing.
Sorry, did you say Kunta Kinte Island?
Yeah.
Kunta Kinte, okay, from roots.
Yeah.
Kunta Kinte, a name that echoes through time, a symbol of resistance and the unbreakable fight for freedom. Born in the 18th century in the village of Jufura, Gambia, Kunta Kinte wasn't just any man. He was a member of the Mandinka, tribe people known for their rich cultural heritage and warrior spirit. But what happens when a warrior is ripped from his homeland? What happens when his identity is threatened? Kunta Kinte's life changed forever the moment he was captured and forced into the horrific transatlantic slave trade. Imagine being torn from everything you know, crammed into the belly of a ship, shackled and sold. Kunta endured the brutal middle passage and faced the harsh realities of slavery in America. But his spirit? Unshakable. In Alex Haley's Roots, we witness Kunta's defiance. Stripped of his freedom, his family, and his home, one thing they couldn't take was his identity. They called him Toby, but Kunta Kinte fought to hold on to his name, his heritage, and his dignity. Even under the threat of death, he resisted. Can you imagine that kind of strength? Kunta Kinte's struggle wasn't just about survival, it was about defiance. It was about holding on to his identity, even when the world tried to erase it. His story speaks for millions of others, those who fought silently, those who suffered, and those whose stories were never told. But Kunta Kinte's legacy was told. It transcends one man's journey, reflecting the broader, collective suffering of those enslaved. His refusal to be broken, his desire to remain true to who he was, is a powerful reminder that freedom is more than a condition, it's a mindset. Kunta Kinte's name lives on, not just as a figure of history, but as a symbol of unyielding resistance. He reminds us that even when the world tries to take everything from you, the strength to resist can be your greatest weapon.
There's a place called Kunta Kinte Island.
I'll probably sound very ignorant, but Kunta Kinte was a real person?
Yeah. I mean, the stories that appear in the book Roots and so on may well have been spun, may well have been stretched, but yeah, it's based on a real person.
Oh, wow. So was the island named after the fact that he gained some kind of like exposure over time, or was it always called Kunta Kinte Island?
No, it's got the name now.
Okay.
To tie that history in.
I see. Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah, and so the people did an excursion to that, and they went to the museum that was there and so on.
All right, interesting. So I probably sound like ignorant again, but when I think of African history, and I think I mentioned this off camera, I always affiliate African history with outside of Africa. People wanted to learn about Africa from outside of Africa. But Africa itself, I don't always affiliate people wanting to study the history, because normally it's passed on from generation to generation and households.
In truth, Black people in Africa need black history more than anybody else because
I was thinking that.
between what is there and what the average person knows is bigger. But a lot of people from Africa don't realize that.
I see.
And so what happens is the assumption that many people have is the people outside Africa don't know black history, but the people inside Africa do. And that assumption isn't merited, unfortunately.
You know, it's funny that you said that because I've always thought that African Americans and Caribbeans understand African history more than Africans themselves on the continent. And I think it's because they make it an effort to study Africa, whereas I feel like a lot of Africans, I'm not saying all, because I've met some African scholars who live in the continent, from the continent, who do like to study African history. But I feel as if African Americans and Caribbeans take it way more seriously. Do you know what I mean?
The African school system doesn't teach nationalism. Students are programmed to love everything European and less appreciate everything African. This is so bad that students even get punished for speaking their own native language in class, but praised for fluently speaking a Western language. In our schools, we are trained to dress like Europeans, talk like Europeans, sing like Europeans, pray like Europeans, taught stories and heroes of Europeans, taught to learn and love cultures and beliefs of Europeans, while we are programmed to believe and accept that every one of our African cultures and beliefs are either useless or demonic.
So it looks like the African Union want to take a more aggressive approach to educate an African fit for the 21st century. Now, majority of the African leaders decided during the recent African Union Summit that they want to shake up the status quo with the ongoing project in education, and they want to emphasize in primary education, and they want to improve innovation through STEM, which are great things. The one that really got me was that they want to decolonize African curriculum. This means removing remnants of colonial teaching in the African education system, which include ideologies like the inferiority complex or the emphasis on foreign history.
One of the things is a lot of people, especially from the African continent, don't realize just how far the game has moved. Because the efforts to learn African history, especially from people outside of Africa, has produced and has turned up so many new things that it's fair to say that African history and what it is and what its scope is changing daily as we're finding more things out daily. And so the stock of knowledge, I mean, when I wrote When We Ruled, that was 700 pages originally. And then I did another edition, which was 800 pages. Even that is now behind the curve as we're finding out more and more new things.
When you say that you've done another edition of When We Ruled, earlier when you showed me a book, is it that one, or was it another edition of When We Ruled itself?
A second edition of When We Ruled.
I see. Okay, I see.
That's right. So what happened was, when I wrote When We Ruled, it was 2006. And it took me 7 years to write. And it was everything I had access to up to 2006. By the time the second edition came out, a lot of new information had been found.
Yeah.
And the time period from then till now, huge amounts of new information. And so if people are relying on oral tradition, what's been passed down to them, again, behind the curve.
Yeah.
Way behind the curve.
Well, that's very interesting. Talking about African history and how Africans have more to learn about African history. Off camera, you mentioned that Ethiopia has more of a, how can I articulate myself, accurate record of African history than most countries in Africa. Is that what you said?
That's not quite what I said.
Okay.
What I said was the average Ethiopian knows more
about African history.
Yeah, about their history.
Oh, their history.
Compared to if you were to speak to your average Kenyan about their history. And I've had that conversation.
Why do you think that is?
Because the brainwashing that came with colonization.
When you grow up in a colonial system, or in whichever system you grow up, people who design that system design in such a way that they will produce a certain kind of people, because they give them a certain kind of information, they expose them to a certain kind of information, and they keep certain kind of information away from them. So you grow up with a certain attitude. You are shaped. Your mind, your attitude, your values are shaped. Your world is shaped. And you are deliberately discouraged to appreciate anything about you, because you are not supposed to know or to imagine there was anything good in your pre-British experience. So your people in the pre-British era were primitive, they were backward, they didn't know anything, they did not even know anything about God. Now you know about God, you know about Jesus, you're saying the rosary. Remember, I was saying the rosary. All these things are packaged in such a way that you look at the British and you admire them greatly.
The brainwashing that came with colonization didn't really hit Ethiopia as hard as it hit everybody else. The Italians muscled into their country, but the Italians were only a force in their country for a very short period of time.
So they didn't have a strong enough influence.
So so the brainwashing didn't really happen. And what's more, in Ethiopia, the sense that they have of the history is such that it's stuff to be proud about. It's stuff to big up yourself about. Now, Kenya has got monuments, has got artifacts and so on, but because of all kinds of stupidities, including tribalism and blah, 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 this and that, the average Kenyan doesn't represent, even though the stuff is there that you could represent with.
So when you say tribalism, earlier on off camera, you showed me some pictures from your book. What's the name of that book, please?
It's called Before the Slave Trade.
Is it possible if I can hold it up to the camera, please? Or if you can hold it up to the camera.
Okay, the book is called Before the Slave Trade.
Yeah.
It's also called African World History in Pictures.
Yeah.
And the point of that book was to supplement, I'd already written When We Ruled, the point of this was to supplement it with more images. Okay, now the point I was making...
About tribalism.
Yeah, if you take, for example, Nigeria. In Africa, Nigeria has perhaps the fourth country with the most history. So if you were to list African countries, which one has the most history? It'd be Sudan would be number 1, Egypt would be number 2, Ethiopia would be number 3, Nigeria would be number 4.
All right.
Nigeria, monuments galore, fine art galore, manuscripts, etc., etc., etc. But if you speak to your average person from Nigeria, they don't know what you're talking about.
So we were stuck in traffic, and this vendor suddenly approaches my window with a half-opened alphabet sheet. I took a quick look at the alphabet sheet, and I thought of my daughter. So the traffic moved a bit, and I quickly grabbed the copy, and we moved on. When I had time to fully open the alphabet sheet and take a more detailed look at it, I knew I was not going to use that to teach my daughter. I regretted my purchase. Why so? Looking at the alphabet sheet reminded me of the fact that not much has changed in the education curricula in Africa. Some decades back, I was taught out of a similar alphabet sheet. And because of that, I struggled for years. I struggled to reconcile my reality with the formal education I received in school, in the schools I attended. I had identity crisis. I looked down on my reality. I looked at my ancestry. I looked at my lineage with disrespect. I had very little patience for what my life had to offer around me. Why? A is for apple. A is for apple. A is for apple, is for that child in that part of the world where apples grow wild. Who has an apple in her lunch bag? Who goes to the grocery store with her mom and sees red, green, yellow, apples of all shapes and colors and sizes? And so introducing education to this child with an alphabet sheet like this fulfills one of the major functions of education, which is to introduce the learner to an appreciation of the learner's environment and a curiosity to explore more in order to add value. In my own case, when and where I grew up in Africa, apple was an exotic fruit.
The African education system was designed by the European colonizers, and it was designed to program the Africans to become obedient employees, totally dependent on them, and definitely not independent problem solvers. And the interesting part is, even up till now, over 90% of Africans do not have a single idea of what is going on. And so the question still remains, how do we even correct what we have no idea of? Unfortunately, when Africans gained independence, the leaders inherited the colonized school system alongside, and so now no significant changes have been made. The general purpose of education is to train or program students to develop the skills of solving problems on their own. So students are best trained if they are trained with a method of identifying and understanding a problem, and then reasoning to find a solution for the problem they have identified, with the teacher showing the process in practical form. But typically, an African child is trained with a method of memorizing answers only to pass tests, and the child doesn't even have to understand the problem or how the answer came about. They just need to get the answer right. Plus, over 90% of the education is done in theories with very little done in practicals. All this makes real-life problem solving either very difficult or impossible. So we see lots and lots of educated people with very good grades but can't solve any problems in the society. Many would think that Africa with its vast natural resources would have countless schools that teach Africans what the natural resources are, how to mine them, what they are used for, and how to process them from their raw states into finished usable products. But no, it's quite the opposite. Countries that do not have the kind of resources we have rather train their citizens on how to identify our resources, how to mine them and process them, while African students are being educated to memorize how to draw and label insects, how many times religious people pray, the life cycle of mosquitoes, and many other nonsense that do not solve no problems in the society. And we still get surprised when other countries buy our raw materials cheap, process them and sell them back to us expensive. And it is not a surprise that many of Africa's top private problem-solving companies are owned by foreign entities, while Africans move around with their certificates begging for jobs.
I am convinced that Africa's further transformation, Africa's advancement, rests simply in the acknowledgement, validation, and mainstreaming of Africa's own traditional, authentic, original, indigenous knowledge in education, in research, in policymaking, and across sectors. This is not going to be easy for Africa.
And one of the reasons is tribalism gets in the way. So to give you an example, there's a very famous, I say very famous because I'm into African history, but there's a monument built in the 1840s by a Nigerian architect. His nickname was Babangwani, which means master architect.
Oh, wow.
Malam Malaiku is his actual name. And the monument is called the Grand Mosque of Zaria, with its 6 domes, the internal arches. It's an exquisite monument. And one would have thought that, when Eurocentrists are talking about, but you Africans don't have anything.
That would come up straight away.
Right. But then because it's in Hausa territories, and most Nigerians in England are more likely to be Igbos, number 1, Yorubas, number 2, they're not going to mention it.
So it's history that only the Igbo people will talk about.
Or they wouldn't talk about. So if you're Igbo, you're only going to talk about Igbo stuff.
Yeah.
So consequently, that being in Hausa territory means zip it.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was researching this back in the day, I asked at the Nigerian embassy, can I get a picture of that monument so I could put it in my book? The response was, the Great Mosque of what?
Wow.
Was the response. And you can work out why, because again, if people's alliances are really to their ethnicity, not to the country, but to their ethnicity, they're not going to mention that.
But you know what? One could argue, because I've heard Nigerians tell me, several Nigerians have told me that Nigeria is not meant to be Nigeria. It was carved up by Europeans.
Absolutely true.
So therefore, a lot of them want their own independent states, their own independent countries, right? Now, one would argue that the reason why they do so is because why would they have knowledge of something? Because look, I live in England. I don't know everything about Germany. I'm just giving an example of our geographical landscape, right? So it's easy for me, if someone say something about Germany, I'll be like, what are you talking about? Maybe it's the same thing for Nigeria, where it's like, it's so, the land is so massive that maybe they're part of the landscape. They wouldn't know about that.
Yeah, let me answer that question. You see, there was a time period where the Nigerian government and the Nigerian intellectuals stepped very correctly. And that's what's missing. So it blows most people's minds to know that West African history was written in Nigerian universities. Facts. The textbooks came from Nigerian universities. There used to be University of Ibadan. Yeah. If you look at the textbooks that were written in the 70s and so on, and these textbooks were not Nigeria's history, it was West Africa's history. Ancient Ghana, medieval Mali, the Songhai Empire, the Ashanti Empire, the Kanem-Bornu Empire. This was all being produced by Nigerian intellectuals. They didn't say, well, I'm not this insert ethnic group here, I'm not writing about it. They're going to write about it.
So where do you think that division came then? Where do you think that tribalism
what had happened is Nigeria was oil rich, and they could afford to do that. And then as austerity and other things kicked in, those kinds of educational things were seen as luxury. The history was seen as luxury. And so consequently, you move forward a couple of generations. History, what history? Do you see? I have a book at home called 2000 Years of Nigerian Art. And it was commissioned by the Nigerian president at the time, General Murtala Mohammed.
The assassination of Murtala Mohammed. Murtala Mohammed was a charismatic Nigerian military leader who became the country's fourth head of state in 1975, after leading a successful coup that overthrew the government of General Yakubu Gowon. However, his time in power was tragically cut short on the morning of February 13, 1976. On that fateful day, Murtala Mohammed was on his way to work in his Mercedes-Benz car, accompanied by his aide-de-camp and driver. As they drove through the busy streets of Lagos, they were suddenly ambushed by a group of armed men who opened fire on the car. The attack was swift and deadly. Murtala Mohammed was hit by several bullets and slumped over in his seat, while his aide-de-camp and driver were also killed in the hail of gunfire. The attackers then fled the scene, leaving chaos and confusion in their wake. News of the attack quickly spread throughout Nigeria and the world. People were shocked and saddened by the sudden and violent death of a leader who had only been in power for a little over 6 months. The country was plunged into mourning as citizens tried to come to terms with the loss of a man who had promised to bring about much-needed change and reform. In the aftermath of the attack, investigations were launched to try and identify the perpetrators and bring them to justice. The investigation led to the arrest and trial of several suspects, including Dimka, a lieutenant colonel in the Nigerian army, who was found guilty of masterminding the assassination. Though Murtala's murderers were captured and were publicly executed, there are conspiracy theories about the cause of his death. One of such stories linked the West to the killing. Many believe that his Africa has come of age speech, which he delivered 32 days before his assassination at an extraordinary meeting of the OAU held in Addis Ababa, might have incensed the Western power that eventually planned his assassination.
And his stamp is in the book. And it actually has his,
Oh, wow.
And the logic behind the book was to provide a pan-Nigerian pride in all the different ethnic traditions where they've produced an art tradition.
Oh, wow. So all their contributions in one book.
Right, so you then had the oldest stuff, which is called the Nok civilization. Then you've got the Igbo culture. Then you've got the Yoruba civilization. Then you've got the Benin Empire. Then you've got Nupe. Then you've got the modern stuff. It's in one book. And the book itself is an absolute classic. You don't have to be Nigerian yet. Any black person, basically, if that book's not in your book collection, you're a sellout. It's that simple.
Oh, man, I better make sure I get that book, guys. You better make sure you get that book. Oh, man.
Thanks for watching. Please be on the lookout for part 2 coming soon.
When I say that Sudan has the most amount of African history, it's not just pyramids.
Okay. Some people must have some extreme views.
Yeah.
So just cancel out everyone and just make it FBA. Do you think that's what's going on here? Or do you think that is true that it was only African Americans that created hip-hop?
He visited ancient Egypt. And guess what he talked about once he visited? He saw the prototypes of the ancient Greek gods.
Wow.
So that the idea then that Amen becomes Zeus, becomes Jupiter. But during the colonial period, when England colonized, they did destroy a lot of stuff. And so the British colonial authorities do have a lot to answer for.
I see.